What animal do you know of that's been shot out of a gun, bathed in boiling hot water, exposed to intense ultraviolet radiation, was sent to space and crash landed on the moon, has been quantum entangled, and can go into cryptobiosis? Well, the tardigrade can. American tardigrade expert Mike Shaw joins me to break down what a tardigrade is and how much these little buddies have endured in the name of science. Join us as we get rebelliously curious. Mike, thank you for joining me on Rebelliously Curious. So I'm a massive fan of tardigrades, and I know a lot of our debriefers at the debrief are as well. So you are an expert in that space, and I'm extremely happy to be talking to you about this. I've also seen your documentary piece that you've done with Vice, and I believe you do have a website and a book around tardigrades. Yes.
Right.
So yeah, let's just start off with what is a tardigrade, just in case for people that don't know.
Okay, sure. Well, first of all, Chrissy, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to talk to you. Tardigrades are little microscopic creatures, but they're not really too small. You could actually see them with the naked eye or a magnifying glass. Typically, though, we look at them under the microscope, and they have 8 legs, and they're cute. They're also called water bears because they look like plump little bears, but they have 8 legs. They have a cute little face with a kind of a bear nose, and they even have 2 little eye spots. So they're called moss piglets because they also look a little bit like a pig, and we find them in the moss. So they have a lot of interesting characteristics, as you probably know.
Oh, they are. I like moss piglets. That's my favorite. They're such an interesting looking animal as well. Can you tell us how you ended up getting into tardigrade research?
Sure. It was kind of, well, my kids were in middle school at the time, and they were doing science projects, a science project on mold and a science project on the Great Sequoia. And I bought a really nice microscope. You know how fathers sometimes do, go a little bit overboard in helping their kids with science. And I just got so fascinated with microscopic life and looking at things under the microscope. So after their science projects were over, I wondered, listen, what could I do with a microscope to make some sort of a contribution to science or some research? I'm not really a scientist by trade, but I do love science, just like I'm sure you and all your listeners do. So I did a little research, and I found this map of the strange creature called the tardigrade. I didn't really even know what it was, but it was a population survey of the United States. And at the time, I lived in New Jersey, and I noticed on the map there were no tardigrades in New Jersey, 0. So I said, wait a minute, there has to be some tardigrades. There have to be some tardigrades in New Jersey. So I decided that would be my project, and I began hunting for tardigrades. I met with a scientist a professional tardigradologist, went to his university, Baker University, and we sat down and he showed me the techniques, how to find them, what they look like. And then I went back to New Jersey and started looking. So my decision was to go through all 21 counties, county by county, and look for tardigrades. And that's how I got into it.
It's amazing. And you also then discovered different species of tardigrades. I actually didn't know this until recently. I thought there was only one species, but there's over 1,000. And
Correct.
you discovered different types of species in New Jersey. Can you speak a little bit about that and what type of species of tardigrades are and what's the differences and things like that?
Yeah, they look very much the same. You know, when we think of different species, we think of a fox or a tiger or something like that. But within the tardigrade, it's like birds, you know, they're very similar, but they might be different species. So tardigrades, we divide them up by the claws, the positions of the claws. They usually have 4 claws, 2 big ones and 2 little ones. We divide them up by their eggs. Some of them have eggs that look like the coronavirus, with little spikes coming out of it.
Oh,
And
really?
yeah, and some look like, some eggs look like, you've seen those little spiky balls,
Yeah.
um, like that. So and some are smooth, the way they reproduce. So that's how we divide the species. And I haven't actually definitively discovered a new species, but I'm having my research paper, which I did publish, I'm having that reviewed now, and I'm having all my samples looked at again. Here it is, almost 20 years later, and hopefully we will find some new species in there.
Wow. It's exciting. When was the first tardigrade discovered and who discovered it?
The tardigrades were discovered in 1773 by the German zoologist Johann August Ephraim Goetz, Goeze. And he's the person who actually gave them the name water bear.
Oh,
So I
okay.
hope that answers
Nice.
yes.
Yeah. And so there's so many different types of species, but do we know what a like a moss piglet or a tardigrade is really for? Like, what is the real purpose of it? Animals have all different purposes here. And what is the moss piglets? Do we know that by now?
It's such a wonderful question because I've been thinking about that myself lately. What is our purpose?
Yeah.
And then I come up with all sorts of um, theories and comments to myself about consciousness. What is consciousness? We're still investigating that. Here we are, we're mammals, and yet we're self-conscious. So you show a dog a mirror, it doesn't really know that in that mirror is the very dog that's looking at it. He doesn't necessarily have that consciousness. So how do we differ? And then I look at squirrels and I ask myself, what's the purpose of a squirrel? Well, we know they bury these acorns, but perhaps part of their purpose, my guess only, would be some of those acorns don't get dug up and they get planted and those grow into new oak trees. So one could say, and I'm answering your question,
Yeah,
one
for
could
sure.
say that there is a purpose, um, to assist, let's say, the oak trees in reproduction or bees pollinating. What's the purpose of a bee? So when you say what's the purpose of a tardigrade, it's a hard question to answer because they've been around for 90 million years. We found them in amber. Um,
Wow.
so um, I think species can serve different purposes at different times. So maybe they are a food source for some creatures. So could we say that's a purpose? Sure, of course we could.
Right.
Um, but they may have other purposes that we don't know yet. So, like for example, right now there's a big push to use them as a resilient creature for interstellar space travel. So,
Right.
right, we've gone back and forth on some of those articles. Maybe that's their purpose. Um,
Yeah. And I was actually going to say to you too, I'm like, the whole
right,
conversation about space and tardigrades is unbelievable right now. And people want to know, like, did they come from space? Is that,
right.
and there also this conversation that they might be living on the moon. So maybe let's start with the space conversation. Did they come from another galaxy or somewhere else and then have landed on Earth? And then how would they have done that?
Right. So to that, you are really, in a sense, adding to the question of purpose.
Right?
Because let's assume for a minute that they came from space and they were one of the first creatures here. And through evolution, other species have evolved. So you could call that purpose. Now, to answer the question more directly, did they come from space? We don't think so, though they could survive the trip. That isn't really the issue. The reason we don't think so is because DNA. Now we have DNA analysis, so we see that their DNA is 98% shared with other species. So it's hard to believe that either they came and all other species came from them. It's possible, but not likely. What might be likely is something else came, maybe bacteria, who shares DNA with tardigrades, and then all species have that similar DNA.
Wow.
But we don't think that tardigrades came from space, despite the fact that they could have survived the journey.
Yeah, because we have crash landed them on the moon before, and we've done so many different experiments with tardigrades. We shot them out of
Right.
guns. They've recently been quantum entangled. So
Hmm.
there's so much. And before we even get into the quantum entangled, you said that there's about 89%, I think you said, that shared anatomy wise with other animals. Can we get into then the anatomy of a tardigrade? Like what is it and what's it makes it so special and able to do these unbelievable things that humans aren't able to do?
Right, right. Tardigrades are very simple animals. They have a nervous system like we do. They don't have respiration like we do. They breathe through their skin. That's different. Um, they have a digestive system like we do, an alimentary tract, the whole thing, stomach. They have digestion. So they have some systems that are similar to us. Like some insects, they molt. So they shed their cuticle or their skin, and then they outgrow it as they grow. So they have a lot of similarities with other creatures. The question of why do they survive so well, they go into a thing called cryptobiosis. And what that is when they're stressed or dehydrated or subjected to something that's threatening to them, they wrap themselves up tightly into what's called the ton, which is a little ball. And they convert they convert the water in their bodies, just like we have water in our body. They convert the water into a type of sugar called trehalose. Okay, and that sugar is like a glass-like substance, so it allows them to survive. And then when they're rehydrated with water, boom, they come back to normal. And that's the strange thing about them. But tardigrades are not the only creature who can do this. There are other microscopic creatures who can do this as well.
Okay. So, and a lot of people think that it's only shared to the tardigrade. What other microscopic creatures do this that's comparable
Um,
to it?
sure, sure. There's a creature called a rotifer, okay, which is they're strange looking vacuum tube type creatures that have spinning wheels on top. They also can do this. Certain annelids or worms, very, very tiny microscopic worms can do it. But the nice thing about tardigrades is when you rehydrate them, they get up and they move around and they crawl around, and they're very visibly animated, which is a nice thing to see, and they're easy to store, and you can store them in little balls, the tons. So, I mean, they're a good creature to work with for science.
Yeah. And again, you led me into a question. Why does science outside of it? Is it just because of their abilities and they're a great, animal to be able to research on? Is there other reasons why scientists use tardigrades in their experiments?
Well, because what we're really trying to find out is this whole survivability capacity. If they can survive freezing temperatures, and they can survive radiation, they can survive the open exposure to the vacuum of space. Um, it's pretty exciting to see what limits humans can go through in space travel. Obviously, we need spacesuits and such, but there may be characteristics. So, for example, there's been research recently, um, because the coronavirus. Vaccines have to be, as you probably know, it has to be frozen or it has to be kept on dry
Mhm.
ice. So we're looking at ways to preserve that vaccine that don't necessarily require refrigeration or freezing. And
Right.
we look at the tardigrade and we say, wow, they have the capacity to be preserved almost indefinitely for decades at least. Maybe there's something they have that we can use in our vaccines that might be useful to preserve the vaccines. So that's one area of research we're looking at
That's
in the
interesting.
most recent experiments. That's what they've been doing.
Yeah, I haven't heard about the COVID research with tardigrades. So I guess, and that's the best animal to experiment on. I would imagine. We've seen tons of animals that evolve over time. Has the tardigrade, since it's first been found, has it evolved and changed that we've noticed, or is it had stayed, or is the species stayed very similar?
They've stayed the same. There hasn't been any change at all, but they become very popular. I would like to say they were popularized when I did that documentary, and it became a big, search term, and the video went viral. So tardigrade became a #1 search term on Google. It's still very high up there. And you'll find that there are companies, businesses who use the word tardigrade to refer to their IT systems, or maybe computer viruses, or they're just using that word to sort of mean indestructibility. I've seen accounting systems named tardigrade. So it's kind of a popular word now, meaning indestructibility or survivability.
Yeah, because they are amazing. I remember when I came across them, I'm like, what is this little amazing animal? And then I slowly became obsessed with it and watched your documentary
I
that
can't
I
blame
watched on
you.
Vice. Yeah, I great. They're really, really wonderful. I have in my calendar in March when I'm back into the city that I have to buy a tardigrade sweater. So like, I it's like, why not? Like, I love them so much. I should probably just get some clothing around it as well.
Right.
There is this conversation about them being on Mars as well. Do we like? I don't think we know that yet. Nothing about we haven't found any research that I know of. But who started that, and why is Mars one of those places? And I imagine they've also said the moon too. So why is Mars and the moon this conversation that tardigrades live there now or can be found?
Well, okay, the moon to start with. Um, there was a space mission to an Israeli space mission, and it actually crashed, as you know.
Right.
And the tardigrades were aboard that spacecraft, so they ended up on the moon. So they weren't found there as native inhabitants. And on Mars, we still do not know if there's any life whatsoever on Mars. Right now, we're still looking for water on Mars. So there's very little known, but there's a lot known, but very little known in terms of what life could be on Mars. We're still looking. Tardigrades haven't been found there at all, nor have they been sent there.
Right.
It's controversial now. They're thinking about sending tardigrades into space, interstellar space.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Let's talk a little bit more about that. Why
mhm.
are they looking? I imagine because of the abilities that the tardigrade has, that they'll be using it to send to space. But why has, quantum entangling's been something that they've done? Why are they looking to send them to interstellar space? And then my next question would be, why are we entangling tardigrades at this point in time?
Okay, those are two questions which I'll answer, but let's
Yeah,
talk about the sending into space first, which was the
that
first
sounds good.
question. They call it Project Starlight, I believe. And it's a question of using solar sails, like a wind sail on a boat, and hitting it with super high laser power to push it up to very, very high speeds, close to the speed of light. And that's really the only way you could do interstellar travel. So they came up with the idea: what can we put on this theoretical spacecraft? And tardigrades always, typically come up. They can survive the journey. They can be in a state of suspended animation the whole time, and then remotely they could theoretically be revived. The problem with this project, it's nice to talk about and design a project, but they don't really even have this laser propulsion that's workable yet. It's far off in the future. I would say at least a decade or two before we can use that kind of power to propel a solar sail. No less put a tardigrade on it. But it looks good when you're writing a paper and talking about the possibilities. It gets a lot of press and a lot of support for space technology when you talk about actually having a creature that you could put on board. But there's been a lot of pushback as far as the controversy of, should we be sending biological life forms from Earth to other solar systems or other places? That's sort of an ethical problem.
100% it is. And I was going to say
Right.
that as well, of sending our other organisms or any other thing that's alive somewhere else. And how does that interact with the environment that it ends up maybe crash landing on at some point in time in the near future? We've
Right.
already done it to the moon. So why wouldn't it happen anywhere else? I'm going to ask you this because I'm very curious, and everyone who loves sci-fi and superheroes and that entire world will probably be interested in this as well. There is this conversation about engineering genomes and doing this with astronauts down the road. And I'm going to use the word CRISPR, but if CRISPRing, if I'm saying it correctly, using maybe tardigrade DNA. Is that something that is extremely possible that we'd be able to do to help astronauts in long distance travel, space travel?
Anything's possible, but that would be very, very far off in the future. And the reason I say that is when it comes to gene theory, gene therapy, or even stem cell therapy, which is a little more popular right now, where they actually take your own stem cells that your body produces, and then they inject it into areas that don't have that have inflammation, like back, knee joints, etc. This is something that even today, right now, cutting edge technology, it's still a little bit controversial and unknown as to the effectiveness of genetic material, even from your own body, helping with inflammation in another part of your body. So we are experimenting with gene therapy in a very limited way now. It's in the very beginning stages. So it's very far off in the future when we could actually clone and create something in a human consistently without getting some horrific, unexpected results. The main one being death. It's so unpredictable, what can happen. And we've seen it with plants and animals where we've done some limited things with livestock and plants. But genetic modification has been going on for centuries. The corn that we eat today, the yellow corn, which is sweet, that's all genetically modified over the decades, over the centuries. Indian corn, maize is what it's called, all those little colors and everything in there, that's more natural. And it's not as sweet as the corn we have now, but it's through breeding. And breeding really is nothing more than genetic modification. I mean, the dog, the little Chihuahua that you have, was a wolf. It's been genetically modified over the centuries. So gene modification isn't necessarily a terrible thing. It is very possible, but to artificially do it by cloning, that's a long way off, in my opinion.
Is there any other experiments or things that we're doing in gene modification within a tardigrade now?
We're looking at what their genes do. Okay, so yes, we're looking at what is the gene. We've sequenced the genome of the tardigrade. So we're looking at, what is the gene that actually allows cryptobiosis, allows them to go into this state of suspended animation. Where is this gene located? But we're a long way off from really knowing perfectly how these things function, because a gene consists of, it's this coded structure of amino acids, and the code produces a protein, and the protein has this cascading effect on the organism. It's very complex. So it's not really that easy to say, well, here's the gene that does this, now let's do something with that gene. It really takes years of research to do that. We're far
Yeah.
from it.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's going to be an exciting time when we understand even more and about how the tardigrade can do cryptobiosis. It's going to be a very exciting time. So, no, sorry, you're going to say something?
Well, you asked about quantum entanglement.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've seen a dozen articles on it. And quantum entanglement, I'll be honest with you, the word quantum is a popular word now, quantum physics, quantum theory. So a lot of people use quantum as a prefix to sell books, to get listened to get articles read. But if you look at what quantum physics is, it's really subatomic particles and how they behave, and the whole, is it a particle, is it a wave? And it's very complex and very hard to understand. And it's one of the areas, I think it was Richard Feynman who said, nobody can explain it, but it's very useful. The analogy is your cell phone. It's a very useful thing. We use it. You love the cell phone, but nobody really can tell you exactly how it works and what it's doing. You could talk about it in general terms. Yeah, there's a chip in it, there's sensors in it, but you don't really know how it works. But you don't need to know how it works to use it. It's the same with quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics is a very useful way of looking at the world and explaining physics and making predictions, but no one really can explain it well. So to say that a tardigrade was quantum entangled is just a way to get you to read an article. And if you'll notice on every page, there are these ads. It's called clickbait, where they want you to click on the ad. So I'm looking at one now. How it works, the ultimate action-packed science and technology magazine. Okay, but really, quantum theory has to do with a particle called the Higgs boson, and it's very complex to explain. But in terms of what they did with the tardigrade, they took superconductors and they stuck a tardigrade in between, and there is a thing called quantum entanglement, and there's a thing. It's a superconductor, and there's a circuit, and it's called a qubit, QUBIT. And it's a unit of information in this whole quantum theory. It's not worth talking about or even trying to explain, but what they did was they put a tardigrade between these two circuits, and okay, no big deal, nothing really happened. But one comment was that the paper that was written hasn't been peer reviewed, and the scientific community just said, I'll give you a quick quote. The experiment didn't entangle a tardigrade in any meaningful sense. And entanglement is where protons and electrons get all mixed up. Let's leave it at that. And it didn't really happen. And this one researcher said, you might as well have just put anything in between these two circuits and said it was entangled. The fact that it was a tardigrade is mostly just frozen water at that point. There's nothing special about it, except it gets people to look at the article and read it. But if you look at any of these pages that have tardigrade on it, I would say 2 out of 10 are nothing more than articles that try to get you to click on advertisements.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because I think that's really important when people are reading articles, that they know that even though something it should be peer reviewed, and having other people in the science community looking at it, improving it as well. I think it's actually a really important part, because just because it means that it's science doesn't mean that it's always 100% correct in the form of different articles that come out. Not saying that science isn't correct. It's always evolving, but it is good to know that when something does come out as a study, that it does need to be peer reviewed as well. Because I did read that too, that it was very surface level. Let's use quantum entanglement. So I'm glad. Thank you for mentioning that, because I think it's really important that's talked about. Yeah.
And the other thing is, especially when it comes to tardigrades, for me anyway, is it meaningful? And is it something new? Is it something interesting? So when NASA was sending the tardigrades up in the space station for experiments, those were all good articles. They were meaningful. They told you what they were doing. They were also experimenting on squid embryos at the same time. They told you what the experiment was about.
Right.
It was good. It was good science to read. It was popular, and it was meaningful. You actually could see, oh yeah, that's what they're doing. But a lot of articles that come out are really they have limited value on all topics. Nutrition, you've seen that too.
Yeah, we have to be mindful in what we're consuming and what we're telling others as well. Before we wrap up, I want to ask you the last questions about tardigrades. What can tardigrades teach us?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. Well, I like to say that tardigrades, they allow us to be fascinated and appreciative of the diversity of life on this planet. And because it's such a relatable animal in terms of appearance, they're cute, they're easily observable, and if you go to my website, it's really geared towards teachers and students, because it's so easy to buy an inexpensive microscope, go to your backyard and look at one. So what tardigrades teach us, what they have to offer, is a doorway, a path into learning and making science fun for me. It's always been fun for me. So for me, that's what they teach us, to be open-minded and fascinated with the world around us, even in our own backyard.
That's great. I love them too. I think they're amazing little creatures. Can you please tell us where people can find you, your website? And I believe you have a book as well. And for people that are watching this and that are debriefers, that we also have a discount for the book. And I'll let you
Right.
speak a little bit about that.
Sure. Basically, not to give you long links, it's very easy. My website is tardigrade.us. So, it would be HTTPS www.tardigrade.us. That's the website. And if you go there, you'll see the links. So there are links to the book, which is Kids and Teachers Tardigrade Science Project book. And there's a link to my course, which is how to find tardigrades. And the discount, which is not shown on the website, but if you're interested in the course, you can look at it and explore it. The discount is, I'm using the code DEBRIEF, all capitals, DEBRIEF, no, one F.
Yep. Yeah, one F.
One
Yeah.
F, right, DEBRIEF. So if you want, you can get a discount for $12.99, which is about half the price of the course. And, I'm not here on the interview with you to sell the course, but I did put that coupon code in there in case anybody's interested. They can just use that and use your code.
I appreciate that, because I know when I tweeted this out and people that are watching this now were sharing it and they were really excited. I couldn't believe how many people were excited to watch this and learn about tardigrades just as much as I was. So thank you so much, Mike, for being rebelliously curious with me, and just excited to be able to have this go to live, and we'll get people to learn more about tardigrades.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it, Chrissy. Thanks for interviewing me. And I thank your listeners and viewers. And if they have any questions, there's a contact on my site as well. Just feel free to ask me questions. I get a lot of those, and I'm happy to email back and forth with anybody who has any questions.